All right, good afternoon, and thank you for joining the Energy Market Update. A special welcome to all of our channel partners able to make it today. My name's John Vieira on the left. For those who don't know me, we got our trusty legal disclaimer on the right, and we'll be covering the usual agenda today with natural gas fundamentals, market news, weather, and then close up with market data, taking a look at how prices have done during November. Starting off with natural gas fundamentals, today was a bit of a surprise. So we're using red negative withdrawal numbers and black would be injection. So the estimates for week ending 11/24 were for a 1 to 8 withdrawal coming out of the ground. When all was said and done, it was a big miss compared to estimates. There was actually an injection of 10 BCF being put into the ground. But want to call your attention to the middle of where this actually happened, right? We have the East, Midwest, and Mountain all making withdrawals, and really the big injection came in the South Central. So, respective markets being impacted like that when we break down the total net number. So, quite a lot has changed on where we are compared to the last to the 5-year average since we last spoke. By the end of June, we were close to 400 BCF in storage. Throughout the summer, into the fall, we dropped below 200 BCF, and then in the past 2 weeks, we've jumped right back up, and now we're above 300. So we've seen a little bit of a November price slide. Prices are getting very low. How much lower they can go as a future? Not much. Where they can definitely jump back up, depending on if these withdrawals pick up. Which, before we look at the chart, just looking at the bottom, these are very preliminary estimates, but calling for a withdrawal possibly in the 75 to 95 BCF for the coming week that ends 12/1. So if those withdrawals start to pick up, and now if we take a look at the chart where the green arrow is, we see that the blue line for where we currently are kind of went left to right, where the drop off on the 5-year average usually starts a little bit sharper around this time. So if that starts on next week's release, right, it might start catching up. If we start getting closer to 200 or even sub 200 in the 100s, we're going to see more upward pressure on prices. But right now, everyone's feeling pretty comfortable. There hasn't been really too many LMP price jumps during November, but the snow and cold is starting to arrive, which we'll cover in the weather section. The channel partners on here, just to note, this is an updated chart, although it looks pretty much the same. We see the orange line atop at the top of the graph. As it goes to the right of the red arrow, it's not really increasing much for production of natural gas here. And we take a look at 22 to 23. Yes, we're doing more in 2023, but not really substantially more. It was catching up during 2022. We have reached new levels in 2023, but it's fractional BCF that we're moving up. And that's compared to what we're exporting from the country. Going from 2016 and not exporting at all from the US to now being 14 BCF and change higher, with expectations of money that's already invested for LNG projects to export from the US to other parts of the world, possibly doubling or even more to 28 to 30 BCF in the next several years. So definitely a reason to explore this with clients for those future years and what the impacts could be. And where is it going around the world? We've seen this before. National Balancing Point over in the UK, the title transfer facility, the point used for the EU, and the JKM used for the Asian markets. So taking a look at the updated risk picture, so not too much change from the October to November risk assessment. The outside risk is still bigger than what's in front of us, but the black arrows, the chance that prices pop higher from where they are compared to the red arrow, the chance that they move lower, the black arrow is much bigger, especially as you move out into the future, as some of these policies and regulations take hold and some of the world issues that might develop. So again, making sure we apply this way of thinking to our regional graphs for ICE New England, PJM, NYISO, ERCOT, and all the markets that we cover. Taking a look at market news. Just again, rules and regulations can change. It's very fluid right now. We've had a lot of changes since the current administration has taken over, and they heavily impact prices. And at any point, they can be changed one way or another for laws. So after a lot of this data is finally be coming back and academics are breaking down what this can mean to the grids and electrical reliability and resiliency as we go forward, Connecticut, who has been really kind of one of the leading states in the country for pushing these rules through without much analysis, just took a look at everything that's going on, and the governor decided, after there was also bipartisan pushback from his own state Congress, to roll back what he had just released 4 months ago about lining up with California's regulation of no gas cars after 2035. So all cars would have to be sold electric by 2035 in the state of Connecticut. They just did away with that. So maybe going on the path of a more balanced approach as we go forward. On the other hand, the other extreme of this, we have Governor Whitmer of Michigan just signed 7 more bills to force the shutdown of fossil fuels and also force electrification in the state of Michigan. The questionable point is, at this same time, there's at least 2 EV battery companies in the state that have been given at least hundreds of millions of dollars, if not more, and they're firing hundreds of workers, 25, 30% of their staff right now. They also, in Michigan, an entire local township threw out their local government so that they could cancel an EV battery company that was linked to the CCP that the governor had approved, that the town had tried to get repealed at the state level. So either way, our takeaway is simply that changes in policy at the state and federal level are continuing to move, and it's going to come down to the question of, do politicians mold policy around data and a balanced approach in the coming years, which will make things smoother? However, if they want to achieve their ideas without really kind of prudently considering the data and just pushing forward by the anything means necessary government whole approach, we're going to have a much more volatile price environment as we move forward, which is why we want to examine those years, especially where they are currently with clients. Sticking on the tone of reliability and resiliency. So reliability and resiliency, meaning that always there to provide and able to come back from extreme events when they happen, versus the shutdown of fossil fuels and the push to clean energy, is going to be a debate for the foreseeable future and how it is handled. So we've talked about recently that every single one of our major market administrators, PJM, ICE New England, NYISO, ERCOT, we have at the federal level, FERC and NERC giving warnings, among many others, saying, hey, we're starting to run into trouble already before a lot of these clean energy rules really roll into effect and the full shutdown of fossil fuel plants and the coal plants start to happen. And we just covered the NERC winter reliability assessment for the months of December, January, and February of 2023. And for our channel partners who haven't seen this yet, every market except ISO is due for an elevated risk. And again, this is before this big electrification of appliances push really goes through and starts driving up demand, and the EVs getting onto the road would drive up demand if these pushes and mandates continue to come through. In New York, they quoted that the demand on the grid might quadruple from this electrification process in the next couple of years. And we're already saying we are having trouble meeting this demand as we are currently. ERCOT had some trouble this summer. They had a ballot question, and they voted to add more dispatchable gas plants in Texas as a result. California, on the other side, who's been a leader pusher of these mandates and policies, they've had to call on their citizens to reduce energy because they just simply don't have enough at sometimes to meet demand. So we're starting to see some cracks in this clean energy push by any means necessary. And the latest coming over from the UK, where the Britain's national grid is going to pay customers to not use electricity on Wednesday nights because they don't think they're going to have enough and they want to make sure. So now they're paying people not to use. So again, trying to find a pragmatic way to move forward. Moving to clean energy, it can be a great thing, but just doing it in a plan that ensures reliability and resiliency at the same time. If that doesn't happen, we're going to see more volatile prices, probably towards the upside, if we lose what we can dispatch versus what is an intermittent resource as solar or wind. So we just want to make sure clients are looking at those outside years. And then the big global meeting going on right now is the United Nations Climate Change Conference, usually referred to as COP. So COP28, the 28th meeting, is happening right now in the UAE. So this is bringing all together world leaders to fight climate change, really just try to reduce negative environmental impacts with obviously energy being a leading topic. In the past few meetings, 25 to 27, a lot of things kind of tentatively agreed upon, where US and Western Europe kind of stretching the limits of mathematically what's able to be achieved on a timeline for clean energy goals, while the other countries that we really need to have join in on this, which would be China and India with the size of their population, have not really agreed to follow many of the decisions made by the group. A lot to digest. This is just starting. It goes through December 12th. But some things that are further out there, we had mentioned a couple months ago, Ireland had considered killing 300,000 cows in the name of climate change. Well, now we have the UN's Food and Agricultural Organization expected to roll out a plan for the West, including the US, basically to eat less meat, because that's going to help the climate change agenda. Strangely enough, this comes out at the same time. A new Oxfam report that's backed up by a few institutes are saying that the richest 1%, who are pretty much the people at the meeting, have the same carbon imprint as the poorest 66% of the population. Either way, we just need to keep an eye on what happens at COP28 and see if the U.S. commits to any more changes while they're there and what might come back to us, or if any of the world supply changes because of the announcements made. Moving on to other world news, we know the Israel versus Hamas situation going on, the terrorist attack, declaring war, the U.S. stepping up behind them militarily. We're just taking a step back, looking through a very narrow lens of supply and demand and what that can mean. So right as soon as the terrorist attack happened, Energy Ministry from Israel tells Chevron shut down the Tamar platform off our southeast coast, which gave a major portion of energy supply for electricity to Israel and some to Egypt and other countries in the area. So immediately you were losing supply that then need to be filled from other parts of the world. We know that our LNG is only going out the door because prices are higher elsewhere, so that's putting more pressure on that. So the Tamar platform has come back to service after more than a month, but just an example of how quickly energy resources can be lost, where it's a lot harder to build them. And we've been covering stories about trying to build energy generation resources and the delays and pushbacks and cancellations that we've experienced in the past 2 years. So brought up the point beforehand of, does this expand further into the Middle East? Will there be energy supply issues when regarding the Strait of Hormuz, which is one of a really narrow strait where a lot of ships need to pass through to get in and out? UAE on one side, Iran on the other. Iran had been pretty quiet since October 7th. However, they just started coming out saying and using the words doubling down on their ownership on 3 contested islands in the Strait of Hormuz. And they're also saying that if the UAE, which is what we just talked about, where it's being hosted for COP28, if they continue to claim those islands, it could further destabilize the region. We also have Iran and others making threats of harsh consequences if ceasefires or a resolution that favors the Palestinians doesn't come out. And then we have some proxy fighting where the U.S. and Iran are fighting, and there's been some attacks going on both ways. The U.S. attacking an Iran-linked facility in Syria. So some of the destabilization in the region. Hopefully everything gets better, but just putting that out there of this is another place where energy supply, where a lot passes through the Strait of Hormuz, things could get real sideways real quick if things don't get better. On top of this, temporary Gaza ceasefire was just extended by another day. The initial that was only supposed to be a few days, it keeps getting extended by the day. And then right after that, we have another deadly Hamas terrorist attack at a bus stop. So we're just waiting to see what results, how this moves forward. Again, hopefully things get better, but just in regards to energy, how that supply and demand picture could be making prices either more volatile if things get worse or smooth things out if things get better. Moving over to China, one of the stories that we still have hanging over our head is the solar story, building solar projects here. We see in 2021 of U.S. solar panel imports, 85% came from 4 Southeast Asian countries and China. In 2022, that grew to 88%. Now, the entire industry came to a standstill in February of 2022 when the Commerce Department of the U.S. found that basically these 4 other countries were just rubber stamping Chinese parts and sending them here. Then in June of that year, after the entire industry ground to a halt, President Biden created a waiver so that this could continue. That expires in June of 2024, which is getting closer and closer to us. And we don't have the economics here to build this in US for the same prices with minimum wage and healthcare and things like that for the same price. So again, with the huge amounts of subsidies going at these projects, they're still becoming unprofitable. We've talked about problems, especially with wind most recently off the coast of New Jersey, Connecticut, Massachusetts getting canceled, and leases not going through in the Gulf. And then with the direct confrontation with China, we did have the president of China, Xi, visit recently. Nothing really substantially came out of that. The 2 hot button issues really are Taiwan and the South China Sea. So this week, and kind of that back and forth, the U.S. is planning to deploy longer range missiles, which China is very unhappy about, calling it a big provocation and drawing similarities to the Cuban Missile Crisis if we make this move. So it doesn't seem like this relation's improving any after the visit from Xi right now. And then really, this is the scariest part. And the CEO of NVIDIA was actually on CNBC talking about this at a conference this week. We've been following it through the view of basically computer chips. So one of the other things we've been fighting about with China is technology and how to move forward and the sharing of technologies. Really since earlier this year, that's been growing. And then over the summer, in August, well, July they made the rule, but August, China cut off 2 rare minerals that are needed for semiconductor chips that are put in computers and phones. And they produce about 80% of one and 60% of the other for the world supply. So really big numbers that is going to upset that market. They have exported pretty much zero for August and September. And the big question is, what happens if they do that to the energy parts? Because we're continuing to push our reliance to foreign countries for this clean energy push. And if they just to say, take their ball and go home, we're really not going to have an answer to fill the big forecasts and goals that we have ahead. So something just to be aware of. Again, hopefully it doesn't happen, but another reason that you might want to take a hedge on those future years, at least a piece. Moving over to Russia, Ukraine-Russia war continues to go on. The supply issues, we're still worried about the nuclear threats, the nuclear de-ratification of the test ban treaty. We have the biggest nuclear plant in Europe that Russia took over. If there was any problems that was going to go on there. Seems like Russia's kind of poking needles by continuing to detain the Wall Street Journal reporter right now. And then most recently, that happened earlier this morning, the foreign minister for Russia basically criticized the West and is blaming the entire war on NATO's expansion for what's going on in the Ukraine, and then stormed out of the meeting after talking. So again, things not really getting better, leading towards bullish stories, especially since we are part of that global energy supply picture now, and we have LNG leaving our shores. So if we don't have any rules to keep that gas here, companies are going to send it to the highest bidder, and it's going to leave less supply for U.S. citizens and therefore higher electricity prices. So just a situation that we need to be aware of as we move forward. Again, for channel partners on the call, very small change on these graphs. This was the old one. Just call your attention to natural gas, nuclear, and coal. Those are the lines that move. And then if we look at the hydro and wind compared on the old to the new slide, hydro and wind are not shooting up into the future by any means. So some of the flashy headlines saying everything's going well, what's actually being used for U.S. electric generation by fuel source, not really moving up by great amounts. On the other hand, we have natural gas moving around slightly, moving up a little bit compared to nuclear and coal in the previous slide. And again, just looking at the numbers, we've seen this before, 2022 numbers, a lot of our markets, not really much movement, a little bit up, a little bit down for the end of last year, and looking at the first half of 2022. And we're looking at the small numbers next to the green or red arrows, showing just up a little bit, maybe 0.5%, down 0.5%. So not too much moving around there, not jumping by increasing by 10, 15% electricity to try to hit any of these goals just yet. Moving over to capacity pass-through is still a great option for PJM and ICE New England clients, even more so if they want to participate in the peak notification program, and even going further if they do any energy efficiency or generation projects on site, which will help them bring down their cap tag, and they'll get the savings passed through to them instead of the supplier keeping it. One thing is, though, there's still uncertainty about when the next PJM auction is going to be held. They keep changing the rules to add in more subsidized assets and renewable assets, which, from our takeaway price-wise, should keep the price at the same or actually push it lower. But it's leaving some uncertainty for fixing for suppliers, so they might be adding a little touch more risk premium since these auctions haven't gone off. And then ICE in New England have been moving along for years, not getting caught up by the states fighting like they are in the PJM territory. But just recently, ICE in New England is asking to put in some new rules. So they're asking for a 1-year delay on the capacity auction that was supposed to be slated for February of 24. That's not been approved yet, so we'll keep an eye on if that gets an extension or if it runs this February. Either way, capacity pass-through, another way to differentiate and talk about ways that a client can manage and bring down their bill. Taking a look at weather, we're going to have 3 forecasts here. So the September, October, and then November look at the months of December, January, February. And just really importantly is this top right corner of around the Great Lakes. So we're in September when this forecast came out from the winter. We see this area in the darker red, so kind of leaning towards the likely above instead of just leaning above. And this is kind of a protection and dangerous area for all the Northeast and PJM. And as we get to October, we see that darker color disappears. So yeah, maybe it's a little bit hotter on average, but that's kind of some of the protection for the polar vortex or whatever clever name that the meteorologists are putting out that year. Coming down, basically, it's the Arctic oscillation when we have those polar vortexes shoot down, which happens all the time in the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic, and then once in a while in ERCOT with like Storm Uri when it went down the whole middle of the country. So the most updated for November for this winter, not too much has changed, a little bit more red over Vermont, New Hampshire, top of New York. But that Great Lakes area, that protection is still hanging out there. And that's going to be really the crux of this winter. Do the storms come or not? So we are in El Nino, which has made people feel more comfortable because that usually means a warmer and wetter winter compared to La Nina, which we were in winters past. However, we were in La Nina last year, and we had one of the hottest winters on record for the U.S. and around the world. But some of the new factors that only come out really in the short term, they're starting to play for more snow and storms this winter, especially for where our markets are in the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic. Looking at other people's forecasts that we've been looking at since August, Farmer's Almanac calling cold and snowy, Old Farmer's Almanac the same. But now as we're starting to get closer, AccuWeather's prediction, if we take a look at snowfall from last year to this year, I mean, almost tripling in Boston or higher, going that way. We see that throughout New York into Philadelphia and the Pittsburgh area. So the storms and cold shots are where we see prices pop up. That's when the LMPs take off. And how many events we have this summer, really at this point, most meteorologists will tell you it's anyone's guess because you can only forecast Arctic blocking and oscillation accurately 4 days to 2 weeks out, really, is what they put out there. So having a plan before that, because once the storms, if they start hitting, the LMPs go up, it's going to be too late. Prices are going to jump up quickly, and it's going to be hard to catch them like we've seen happen many times in the past. So we had snow and cold has started in the Northeast. We've had snow in ICE New England, had some blizzards out in the Northwest. And now we got the snowstorms really starting, kind of hitting the PJM NISO area so far, a little bit traveled into Vermont. But 42 inches fell in a part of New York. And again, this is because of, and if you look online, the Great Lakes effect. That's what churns all this up with that protection gone. The chance of this happening more during the winter, that's what we're worried about with prices rising. If we get a warm winter, prices will continue to taper off slightly. If we start getting snow and we see the LMP shoot up, the prices are going to make dramatic jumps. Taking a look at weather over the next 7 days, it's getting a little bit cooler starting next week as we start off December. So we see some of the temperatures getting into the 20s highlighted by the blue arrows. And just added a picture down here for the channel partners joining. Again, just another way to look at locking in an LFBI, load following block and index. You can take off any amount that you want from 1 to 99% before fully locking in, but just going with some cookie cutter numbers, maybe 25, 50, 75, or 20% hedges at a time to layer in at reasonable times, like now when most markets that we're going to see are at around or at the 52-week lows. Taking a look at market data, a lot's changed since we last talked, especially for January and February 24. And again, this is the time of year where it's a roller coaster for prices. They go up and down. So looking at just January and February 24 prices, right, they're below 10.8. Just recently, they were at 14.8. At this time last year, they were over 30 cents. So big difference on those prices. They've come down, and as we go out to next year, that risk hasn't really totally come off of those outside years yet, but those will move up and down respectively. Start running into trouble, those prices shoot back up, which is what happened in ERCOT when they ran into trouble this past summer. So December is off the board, so we're just looking at calendar year 24 for right now until 24 starts breaking down when January comes off, and then we'll be looking at 25 when we meet again. So ICE in New England calendar year 24 was up a half mil week to week, but it did establish a 52-week low on Monday. And we have kind of had a November slide. Things have gone okay for November. Really haven't had those spikes just yet. Storage is in an okay place. The cold hasn't totally hit New England. So again, taking advantage when it's this low with the chance that it could shoot up very quickly. Algonquin, similar story, off a half cent week to week, establishing a new 52-week low yesterday. PJM, just like ICE in New England, we see January and February 24 now below the 5.4 mark. If we look at January of 26, right, much higher. And these prices were more than double at the same time last year. So that's the volatility we're dealing with. And if you look at any of the wholesale tracker marketing material we have, you're going to see the indexes in the past. This is about the level they clear at. So to see prices go much lower ahead of time, they can't go much lower, but they can go a lot higher. And then reality will strike, and then it will settle. It could go a little bit lower, but for the future prices to sell that way. Taking a look at PJM Western Hub was off a half mil week to week after establishing, again, new 52-week low on Monday. So same for ICE New England Electric and PJM. It's kind of had that November slide. But PJM has been in a little bit of a different situation where ICE New England kind of pushed down. PJM keeps continuing to rally until this recent little drop again. So it's been getting close to that 52-week average. Again, great time to pick some of that up before winter starts for now and the coming years before those winters, because if this winter takes off, it's going to move up the next two winters. Taking a look at PJM gas, off a penny and a half week to week, establishing the new 52-week low yesterday. So we've seen that November slide happen here over the past 4 weeks. But on this y-axis compared to the New England prices, it's not as big. So make sure you take a look at the numbers on the vertical axis going up and down. On the other hand, we have ERCOT Houston. So ERCOT continued to hit record lows throughout the summer. The heat came. The intermittent resources, especially the wind, didn't really perform some of the times they needed it to, and prices took off. And as a reflection of that, the ERCOT market totally turned around from what ICE New England and PJM had been doing since the beginning of 2023. So we take a look at ERCOT Houston calendar year 2024. It's hanging around the 52-week highs. And we can see exactly when the price took off. You get into the spring, summer heat starts coming in, prices take off. And these are the trouble months for ERCOT. For ICE New England PJM, the trouble months are the winter. So if we run into that kind of trouble, that could be exactly the case for prices. So we're not just blowing smoke. This is what happens. We're in a very volatile market. We react to what happens in reality, and it's really hard to predict what's going to go on with the weather and also the global events. So just making sure clients are aware of what could happen. Taking a look at Houston Ship Channel, off 1 cent week to week, establishing a new 52-week low on Tuesday. So again, great time to pick this up. How much more can this slide from here? And Henry Hub, the Houston Ship Channel, pretty much same shape, same price because they're pretty much next to each other, but it's moved to different regions. ICE New England, the basis. If we take a look from last year at this time, the space between the blue and the gray is the basis. And if we take it now, we see that that's a lot closer. So good time to lock in basis for ICE New England, because if there's any problems with the gas up here, again, this will spread out from where the gray is. And then when we look at PJM, now this is wholesale price, not weighted for your load usage and by the time it gets to retail, but the red line actually moving a little bit below. So negative basis right now because the winter has gone down for the winter months for gas and PJM below the Henry Hub. So what a wonderful time to lock in basis for PJM gas. You're basically getting for cost of the Henry Hub up in Pennsylvania, up in the PJM territory. Taking a look out in the future, looking at ICE New England, we had 24 up a half mil after that fall, and the outer years off just slightly. So not too much of a change here. And again, the 2023 bar is the last price that calendar year 2023 traded on December 28th of 2022, which is reflective here. So if we look on this graph, the line graph, the end of this navy blue line is that the price on that gray bar graph. So again, that's where prices could go back up to. We see that right now for ICE New England, Algonquin, they're down considerably from that top level, but could move up. And that's what we want to evaluate with clients is we had the administration change, we had policies changing, then we have the start of the Ukraine-Russian war, then the China-US confrontation kind of kicks off. We made it through. We had the hot winter last year, so we saw prices come back down, and we've been traveling though on the lower side. So from the right side, prices could go up to the top of 24 here, top of where 23 traveled, or maybe they drop here. So that's the risk clients are looking at. Do I hold on? Do I have a hay house for winter and hope everything goes on warm? Or if storms come, I could be in a lot of trouble. Should I take some of that risk off, at least with some kind of hybrid product? And we want to use that same methodology throughout all these charts for both gas and electric. Taking a look at PJM going out into the future, 24 was off a half mil, outer years off slightly. 24 is now 5 mils cheaper than 2025 in PJM. And again, that gray bar is the end of the navy blue line because that's when the year 2023 started. And then since 24, 25, 26 haven't happened yet, that's why they're continuing to trade and the navy blue line stops. And we see that 24 kind of took a nosedive, and this is a result of those January and February months. The outside year is not giving up those gains because they've cleared there in the past, and things could go a lot wrong and just pop right back up. So evaluating both what's in the near term and far term, because we can do both and customize for clients depending if they want to do different things on the short term versus the longer term look. Take a look at ERCOT going out in the future. Much different bar graph if we take a look at this, right? All the outside years are pretty much at the top of the gray bar. And we've seen some of them pass, like on the Houston Ship Channel. We've seen 26 and 27 get up to the 4-1 line after the excitement that happened just from the summer. So just being conscious that that same situation can happen in ICE New England and PJM just with some weather coming through, which is exactly what happened in ERCOT, which was compounded by intermittent resources not being able to hit, although ERCOT did just vote on a ballot measure to add some more dispatchable gas-fired plants down there. Taking a look at the ERCOT, going, again, blue line, we see the outside years, the blue and the green, pretty much on top of each other for 25, 26, a much tighter trading range, but we see that 24 is taken off. So this is a way to maybe get in before the outside years start to catch up to 24. So a different situation to take advantage of in ERCOT. And then most of the way the market has been since the beginning of this year, we had that huge decline, and we're evaluating like where can prices go from here? What is the upside? The bearish story is going down versus the bullish story is going up. So we want to manage the risk of how high it can go from here and what's the probability of that happening. Taking a look at evaluating longer terms, because a lot of these policies towards electrification of products and the EVs are going to dramatically increase demand on the grid. Will we be able to handle it? That's especially for the outside years coming up. Those rules are starting to be enacted. We have the most expensive months being the winter for ICE New England PJM versus ERCOT being the summer months. So contract terms important, especially when you're talking about comparing utility rates versus a 12-month or 24-month rate. And right now we have Cal 24 electricity and natural gas prices for all of our all gas and electric markets except for ERCOT, close to the 52-week lows. And that was spiked because of their trouble months. Very reasonable time to lock in prices for some or 100% of a client's load now before winter really starts. And then the government push to go green by any means necessary. Hopefully it goes well, but if we lose fossil fuel supply, which we have been, and we're not able to bring on renewable supply in time, which we've been facing many challenges, especially with the wind. If you want to Google some of the other articles that are out there, if we don't replace that in time, we're going to have a tough sledding ahead. So take a look at those outside years with clients. And then also differentiating by talking about capacity and renewables and how to optimize those, whether through a fixed adder or a capacity pass-through strategy is a great way to go. Thank you everyone for attending. Please reach out to your account manager, channel partners if you have any questions. Have a great day.